So, what are some of the most important things providers can do to influence program quality and outcomes today? And I understand you know their budgets, you know their
Mhm.
the constraints they're working on. So, I'd love your advice for those on the call today.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned in the introduction that I was fortunate enough to be part of the team working with the Wallace Foundation and the Rand Corporation on a project that they called the National Summer Learning Project. And this was a 6-year study where not only were we working across 5 large urban school districts helping to understand whether and how summer programs are having an impact, but we were also like learning with them, right, about what made the difference. And so there's a huge body of research that came out of that work, and a number of different studies from Rand. But they did identify 8 key practices for programs serving elementary school youth that had a significant impact on whether or not the programs were achieving their results. And so
Mm,
I'll talk a little bit about some of those, and maybe we can dig into them a little bit deeper. But the absolute number one thing that programs can do is early, intentional, comprehensive planning. So what we were finding
fascinating.
when, yeah, right, is a lot of times when we were talking to schools and program providers, they weren't really planning for summer until spring. And then summer's right around the corner, and you don't really have enough time to consider the needs of young people, consider the interests of young people, make adjustments to the planning process. And so there's one of my like favorite. I'm not going to say the quote exactly, but I'll paraphrase. There's a quote in the study that says, "Planning a summer program is like planning a full school year, but with less time and fewer resources." And I'm
Mm,
sure the
yes,
folks on this call can relate to that. You really have
yeah.
to replicate everything, right? And the programs that we worked with, if they didn't start planning by January, it was much less likely that they were going to achieve the student outcomes that they had set out to
Mm,
achieve. Um, there is, so you think about what it takes to run an effective school year. It takes, people who oversee food service, transportation, curriculum, attendance tracking, family engagement, you name it, right?
mhm.
Those are the people that need to be around the table with you. There's a district that I worked with in Texas called Grand Prairie ISD, and I had so much fun working with them. And they had a steering committee that they engaged in planning monthly, and they did this year round so that it was never a surprise, right? But when I tell you this steering committee had about 26 people, I'm not kidding, right?
Wow.
Because they had everyone from special ed to nursing to student services, technology, counseling, operations. They had their chief of staff, their finance officer. Everyone knew what was going to be happening for their summer programs so that they could anticipate and plan and
Hmm.
not miss any beats. So intentional planning is the number one thing. The second thing that I'll mention is, and this might sound really simplistic,
Hmm.
but designing the program for the outcomes you want to achieve
Yeah.
is so super important, right?
Yes.
So, like in the Wallace study, most of the districts that we worked with were really focused on literacy and math achievement, for example. But we found that kids needed to spend at least 25 hours learning math in order to
Hmm.
benefit based on the standardized tests that they were using to measure impact.
Yeah.
And kids who did not attend, at least 20 days or who didn't have exposure to those 25 hours didn't see those results.
Yeah.
Same is true if you have a basketball program. You need to make sure there's enough time teaching dribbling versus shooting versus plays versus teamwork. And so really being intentional in design is another super important practice that I think
Yeah.
sometimes gets overlooked.